Here at Afterlife Games, we're currently in the brainstorming phase of creating a military RPG about a team of paranormal assassins. And yeah, that idea is just as awesome as it sounds. But we're probably not going to be able to move forward with the project just because dedicating any resources towards something like that would require a lot more support on Patreon. At the same time, it would be completely unreasonable to expect anyone to give their hard-earned cash to an unproven studio without a prototype or even any sort of proof of concept. We'd like to give the world an ultra-tactical role-playing experience, but until we can deliver on that, we want to try to empower people to design their own games, or at the very least, give them the tools to be better game players. Because even if you have no interest in making games, thinking more critically about the games you play will increase your appreciation for them exponentially. One of the most important things someone can do to become a better game designer is play other games in the genre that they're working in. That's one of the reasons why classifying games into genres is so important. It allows you to quickly see how other designers found solutions to problems within that genre. So if we were going to make an RPG, we would naturally want to research as many of those kinds of games as possible. And by research, I mean steal ideas from. As the saying goes, study the greats. And when it comes to video games, if there was ever a name that could be considered synonymous with RPGs, it'd be Final Fantasy. Over the past 36 years, Final Fantasy's seen the release of dozens of games, spin-offs, animated films, selling over 100 million copies worldwide. And the 16th entry looks like Square Enix is putting all the money they made off these games to good use. But Final Fantasy XVI has a serious problem that I just can't ignore. The Final Fantasy series used to be a major source of inspiration for me, but it's hard to continue to look at these games under the same lens when Square Enix keeps telling me right to my face that they do not want me in their community. With this video, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about what we stand for here at Afterlife Games, what we're all about, the objective that we're working towards, a more inclusive and culturally aware video game industry. So here's what's gonna happen next. A bunch of racist white people are about to out themselves in the comments, but that's okay. We want them to do that so we can ban them as quickly as possible. Let me be clear, I'm not here to argue with anybody. This topic is not open to debate. These are my views and opinions based on my own life experiences. Any attempt to question my logic, point out flaws in my reasoning, or otherwise undermine my observations will be interpreted as hostility. For the record, I don't like describing people as white unless they deserve it. Because personally, I consider whiteness to be the negative cultural aspects of European society. Imperialism, colonialism, fascism, Sunday brunch. That's some white people shit. To me, it's a cultural distinction that has nothing to do with rhythmic ability or the proper application of seasoning. Cause check this out, I can introduce you to some Vietnamese people I went to school with who are culturally black. It's weird. The only difference aside from skin tone is that they eat soup instead of ribs. That's it! Bruh. Because of that, I try my hardest not to call someone white until they show their true colors. Or lack thereof, in this case. The current subscriber count's gonna take a pretty massive hit as a result of this video, but thankfully, I don't give a fraction of a shit about that. Because the three of us would rather have 0 subscribers than even a single neo-Nazi Klansman amidst our ranks. So if you want to help us chase these idiots away and make sure they never come back, you can spam one or multiple of these phrases in the comments. And the one that's really gonna piss them off, Black Lives Matter. We now return to our regularly scheduled programming. All over the internet, people are criticizing the level of diversity on display in Final Fantasy XVI, which is none. But that by itself isn't what has people up in arms. The problem is how the game's producer tried to justify this lack of diversity. In a recent interview, Ignorant Garbage News asked point blank if there were going to be any black people in the game, or any non-Caucasian characters. Final Fantasy XVI's producer, Naoki Yoshida, also known as Yoshi P, said no in the most diplomatic way possible. I'm not going to go over everything he said, but here's a quote that caught my attention.
Our design concept from the earliest stages of development has always heavily featured medieval Europe, incorporating historical, cultural, political, and anthropological standards that were prevalent at the time. When deciding on a setting that was best suited to the story we wanted to tell, we felt that, rather than create something on a global scale, it was necessary to limit the scope to a single landmass, one geographically and culturally isolated from the rest of the world in an age without airplanes, television, or telephones.
On the surface level, this sounds like a perfectly reasonable response. They're basing their setting on medieval Europe, which, despite all the evidence to the contrary, simply didn't have the most diverse population in the world. As Yoshi P alluded to, people didn't have a way to cross bodies of water during the Middle Ages, which made it exceedingly rare to see another person who was a different race than you. Because in case you didn't know, boats didn't exist back then. A lot of people don't know that. Which goes to show, you can't believe everything you read in the history books. It wouldn't be too difficult to prove that Yoshida was just spouting bullshit. All it would take is the existence of cartography, which was a direct result of marine navigation. But as we've just established, they didn't have boats in medieval Europe, so just forget I said anything. Oh! What have we here? It appears to be a seafaring vessel. And this ain't some broke-ass hoopty like the Nina, the Pinta, or the Santa Maria either. This shit's powered by motherfucking rockets. Look at it. This thing goes faster than boats we have today. If this kind of technology exists in this made-up world of make-believe, that means the writers have always had a perfectly organic reason to include non-Caucasian travelers in the story. So yeah, complete bullshit. Oh, but it gets worse. Because of course it gets worse. Yoshida said something else that has me straight up baffled.
Ultimately, we felt that while incorporating ethnic diversity into the world was important, an over-incorporation into this single corner of a much larger world could end up causing a violation of those narrative boundaries we originally set for ourselves.
What does that even mean? He's saying making the game too diverse would violate the limitations that the developers imposed on themselves. Well, yeah, that's a tautology. If you decide to tell a story where every single character is Caucasian, and then you make a character who isn't, you'd be breaking the rule that you arbitrarily forced on yourself. We're talking about a fictional setting that doesn't exist, so it can be whatever the writers want it to be. In the case of Final Fantasy XVI, the writers specifically designed their setting so that it would be completely devoid of any sort of racial diversity. That's the problem. Yoshi P finished his answer with even more incomprehensible shit. Take a listen.
In the end, we simply want the focus to be less on the outward appearance of our characters and more on who they are as people who are complex and diverse in their natures, backgrounds, beliefs, personalities, and motivations. People whose stories we can resonate with.
Damn. He kinda just spelled it all out, didn't he? I'm doing my best to interpret these quotes objectively, so in the name of fairness, Yoshida definitely wasn't saying that you can't resonate with stories about non-Caucasian characters. I get what he was trying to say, but I still think it's interesting that the writers wanted their characters to be diverse in every way possible, except skin color. If they don't want the focus to be on outward appearance, then it shouldn't matter one bit what a character looks like. The implication here is that if the cast were more racially diverse, the focus would become outward appearance. In other words, brown people existing in this world would be too much of a distraction. By making all the characters Caucasian, they're showing that outward appearance actually does matter. The artists had to do a ton of research to be able to draw and model European features accurately because they knew how jarring it would be if the characters didn't look like actual Europeans.
So we looked at a lot of white people.
Apparently so. The point is, if you could easily change a character's skin tone or gender and have the plot remain the exact same, then there are no consequences whatsoever for including those people in your story. Embracing people who simply want to be seen in the media they enjoy has no downside, unless Square Enix is saying diversity actually does carry consequences. Honestly, I gotta give Yoshi P credit for that answer. I don't know how much time he spent coming up with that, but it takes a lot of guts to pull something out of your ass like that. And I've seen a lot of people on the internet that were satisfied by his reasoning. FF16 is an obvious attempt to capitalize on the success of Game of Thrones, so it naturally follows that the setting would be modeled after medieval Europe. But come on, haven't we seen enough stories based on medieval Europe over the years? In the time since the original Final Fantasy was released 36 years ago, the gaming industry got bored with lava levels, escort missions, and unavoidable stealth sections because they got played out. Same thing with first-person shooters set during World War II. The market for those games crashed because players get tired of seeing the same thing over and over again. So why hasn't the entire world gotten sick to death of medieval European fantasy? It's always weird to me when I see Japanese developers cut themselves out of their own works, but maybe they don't actually see that as being the case. Yoshida said that the world where FF16 takes place is isolated from the rest of the world. Sounds familiar, right? Of all the countries on the planet, which one is famous for isolating itself for hundreds of years? Cambodia? Okay, good. What else?
How about Sunrise Land?
Yeah, exactly. So why did Square Enix decide to make another game based on medieval Europe instead of any other archaic culture? If the goal was to tell a story about an isolated country, why not model it after the nation that the Japanese developers should know the most about?
Why? I don't know.
Part of me thinks the reason might be because decades of being forced to choke down American jingoism led to Japanese people subconsciously perceiving themselves to be of European descent. So maybe the writers did base FF16 setting on Japan, they just didn't know it. Yeah, that's a whole can of worms that has to do with Asian people being considered honorary Caucasians, and you bet your ass I'm going to talk about that at some point, but now's not the time because I'll tell you the real reason 16's modeled after medieval Europe. It's because that's the most economically viable strategy. I've said it before and I'll say it again. AAA games like Final Fantasy XVI are commercial products first and foremost. Anything else comes after the fiscal year is over. Every decision about the development of this game is scrutinized by a team of analysts to maximize profit. These analysts have determined a specific number of copies that FF16 needs to sell in order to be a financial success. If they sell more than that, great, but they'll be happy as long as they hit their projected sales figures. Because of that, the safe bet is to market the game to the largest possible demographic that's statistically the most likely to purchase the game. That means Caucasian males aged 18 to 34 in the United States. I saw someone online ask why Square Enix wasn't marketing more in China, considering their massive population has led to them having the largest games industry in the world. It's true that games generate more revenue in China than in any other country, but the majority of that money comes from MMOs on PC. Console games like FF16 make up for a sliver of China's games business, and part of that is because game consoles were banned in China until 2015. Even though 16 will eventually come out on PC, as a single-player experience it would still be considered a console game. The United States has the largest overall economy in the world, so they automatically have the largest console market. Among people who play games in the US, I was surprised to learn that only 22% of women play RPGs. That can't be right, because every woman that was into games that I've ever met primarily played RPGs, so I don't know. Interestingly enough though, the site where I found this data mentioned that the reason more women don't play RPGs might be because companies don't market RPGs to women. That's funny, right? Game companies don't market their games to women, which causes women to not be interested in the games that weren't marketed to them. And then the game companies turn around and say that women don't like games that aren't marketed to women. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Regardless of the accuracy of this data, this is how companies like Square Enix determine how they'll make their games. I did a bunch of math that I'm not going to bore you with, but it turns out there are only 18 million Caucasian male gamers aged 18 to 34 who play RPGs in the USA. In the fiscal year that Final Fantasy XV launched, that game sold 6 million copies worldwide. 80% of those 6 million copies came from the United States. 80%! And since 71% of America's population is of European descent, that means 6% of the US population accounted for 60% of 15's global sales. If Square Enix has any hopes of appeasing its investors, they can't under any circumstances lose 60% of their revenue, which is why they have to put everything they have into maintaining their relationship with that 6% of America's population. Brown-skinned people, women, Square Enix don't need to sell the game to them, because as far as the data's concerned, it's not worth the risk.
It's time to play Devil's Advocate.
This is gonna sound real strange, but maybe Square Enix shouldn't attempt to make their games more diverse, because they'd inevitably fail that attempt. And I can say that with confidence because they've rolled a natty 1-0 on all their previous diversity skill checks. Back before the merger, Squaresoft started a trope I call "Some of my best friends are Barrett Wallace." Still working on the name, but you get the idea. This trope pops up in a lot of games and I get really bent out of shape whenever I see it. It refers to a game having a token black male ally who's taller and more muscular than every other member of the party. These characters are defined by their physical ability and tend to be hand-to-hand brawlers that angrily punch their way out of tough situations. Even when everybody in the game is a roided-out super soldier, the black one is more massive by several orders of magnitude. Before I started telling people about this trope, I thought I was the only one who thought this was a problem. Thankfully, that's not the case.
The default mode of black characters seems to be loud, aggressive, enormous dudes whose athleticism, strength, and masculinity are their defining traits. That's why heroes like Lee Everett, Marcus Holloway, and Lincoln Clay are so refreshing. They're down-to-earth everymen, not roided-out rage machines.
Oh, I know that feeling.
The reason why this is such a big deal is because the stereotype of a ridiculously buff black dude does actual damage to people's lives. Seriously, this shit is fatal. A 2017 study published by the American Psychological Association showed that black men are seen to be bigger, taller, and stronger than Caucasian men, even when the two are the exact same size. Because of this, black men are also perceived to be more dangerous than Caucasian men, which has caused police officers to be far more likely to fear for their lives in the presence of an unarmed, compliant brown person.
Big fuzzy guy!
As far as I'm concerned, this stereotype is a crime against humanity, and I'm gonna call it out each and every time I see it. And I see it way too damn much. Gunrock from Power Stone. Doomfist from Overwatch. Macaron from Hi-Fi Rush. First of all, let me just say, fuck Hi-Fi Rush. Fuck that game forever. In a world where black people have been insultingly referred to as monkeys, apes, and knuckle draggers for hundreds of years, Tango Gameworks gave the only black character in the game the proportions of an actual gorilla. That is the textbook definition of some bullshit.
Fuck this shit.
Besides just Barrett Wallace, Square Enix has also perpetuated this stereotype with Ash, a supporting character in Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins. As you can see, Ash is taller and more muscular than the blonde-haired, blue-eyed protagonist. His job classes include Pugilist, Berserker, and Tyrant, all descriptors that can be applied to the other examples I've listed. But even when Square Enix's black characters don't fall under the muscle-bound brute stereotype, they're still not up to standard. Final Fantasy XIII Saw's Katsura is often listed as an example of a well-written black character, except for the fact that Tetsuya Nomura thought it would be cool if the dude's fro was a fucking bird's nest. Do you have any idea how disgustingly unsanitary and offensive that is? Tetsuya Nomura didn't, which is why he designed the character like that. Speaking of black hair, one of Forspoken's pre-release trailers caught a lot of flack not too long ago. Not just for having annoyingly terrible dialogue either. No, the problem was that the game featured a black protagonist. But it wasn't white people crying about wokeness like with The Little Mermaid, it was actually other black people that were complaining. What people took issue with was the fact that there weren't any black people on the writing team. The main character's backstory was full of played-out tropes that could have been avoided if there were any actual people of color working on the narrative. Before the game came out, I was talking to a friend of mine about black representation in video games. At some point, I showed her one of Forspoken's trailers and said, something about the main character in this game bothers me. And they were like, is it the straight hair? And I said, bingo. That's exactly what bothers me. Here's what I need to know. Where in this non-industrial world does this woman go when her perm needs a touch-up? Does she straighten her hair with magic? Because if her hair is naturally straight, then she comes across as a disingenuous attempt at diversity. This is a black woman that's been made palatable to a white audience. And some idiots out there might say, but that's what the actress's hair really looks like. Yeah, because that's who they cast to play the role. It's like they were specifically looking for a black woman that could still be seen as conventionally attractive to a Eurocentric society. Without a doubt, I think the developer's decision to create a black protagonist should be celebrated. The writers heard the public criticism about the lack of diversity in the games industry and took action. And it turns out, Black Girl Gamers was actually hired to consult on the game, something that Activision Blizzard's multi-billion-dollar ass couldn't be bothered to do. That is a giant leap in the right direction. But even though Square Enix should be commended for their attempt to improve diversity in video games, the character they created was ultimately a failure. And I could see how that can create the impression that people will never be satisfied no matter what they do. So with FF16, they decided to not even try. I mean, if there are no brown-skinned people in the game, no one could possibly accuse the characters of being racist stereotypes.
Essentially, it solves the problem of being racist by simply erasing minorities.
So maybe, just maybe, it's better for Final Fantasy XVI to have 0 people of color rather than a bunch of characters that would draw criticism like the kind I just delivered. Right?
Fuck no! Fuck no! Fuck no!
The hell kind of logic is that? Just give up on the shit you're not good at? Imagine if that was how everybody approached learning new skills. Guess what, man? Nobody's good at anything right out of the gate, and anything worth doing in life is gonna be difficult. That's just the way things are. If things don't work out the first time, or even the millionth time, you learn from your mistakes and use that knowledge to make the next iteration even better. Remember, The difference between the novice and the master is that the master has failed more times than the novice has even tried. Don't make me hit you with the Rocky speech. I'm not playing. I will motivate the hell out of you. That's it. Rock, let him know.
But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
You know the most ironic part about all this? Square Enix is famous for RPGs, an entire genre that revolves around getting good. But becoming a better version of yourself takes practice and dedication. It's a grind. And when you give up on something, when you stop grinding, you demonstrate to the world that from the beginning, it was never that important to you. In the past, Square Enix made Crystal Chronicles. Now they're making it crystal clear that diversity in their games isn't one of their priorities. Because a big-ass company like that has exactly one priority, and that's their bottom fucking line. But this isn't all on them. You can't just sit on your ass waiting for the corpos to align with your worldview. The fact of the matter is, they're not obligated in any way to tell stories with a diverse cast of characters. Of course they should, because it's the right thing to do, but if they won't, you gotta take matters into your own hands. Tell your own damn stories. Make your own damn games. How many inspirational movies do you gotta see where it turns out the theme at the end was be the change you want to see in the world before you actually do that shit?
Just do it! Make your dreams come true! Just...
Thanks to Europeans trying to take over the world all the time, the media continues to perpetuate this idea that the default protagonist is a Caucasian male. But here at AG, that's not how we operate. In fact, we started this company specifically to combat that kind of negativity within the video game industry. And we couldn't be more proud of the incredibly diverse community we've built. Part of fostering and maintaining a multifaceted community is speaking out against exclusionary bullshit like what Square Enix is doing with Final Fantasy XVI. Am I encouraging people to not buy the game? No, because honestly, I really don't think it would make a difference. Even if every single person who cares about this issue didn't buy FF16, the vast majority of sales are going to come from people who don't think twice about this subject. Or once for that matter. So I think we need to be more strategic about this. If you want to play the game, I say play it. But talk about it. Write reviews and let Square Enix know that you noticed the lack of diversity and it affected your enjoyment of the game. Hit them with the old compliment sandwich so they know you're speaking objectively and not from a place of bias. For example, I really liked the dog. He was a very good boy. But not seeing any people of color in the game made me feel like the world was completely hopeless and beyond saving. However, given the pedigree that Square Enix has for building intricate narratives, I'm sure that Final Fantasy XVII will be better. Something like that. If Square Enix sees enough people criticizing this specific aspect of their game, they're gonna take notice. Now, normally we'd end the video with a splash screen directing you to some of our other content, but we're not gonna do that this time because fuck the algorithm right now. Get off of YouTube and go work on the things you're passionate about. Unless you're passionate about watching videos on YouTube, in which case, you'll figure it out.